When President Trump tried to corner Jasmine Crockett on live television, no one expected her calm to land harder than any insult. What she said next didn't just answer, it transformed silence into history. You could feel it before the cameras even started rolling, the kind of tension that makes the air thick, the kind that holds everyone in suspense, waiting for something monumental to break the quiet that it was Thursday night in Arlington, Texas. The auditorium at the University Center was packed, every seat taken, every breath held. Reporters lined the back walls, cameras humming softly, red lights blinking like watchful eyes. This wasn't just another political event, it was a live town hall broadcast nationwide on 3 major networks. The stated goal was bipartisan dialogue, a phrase that had been thrown around so often it had nearly lost meaning. On one side of the stage stood President Donald Trump, flanked by the American flag, wearing his signature confident smirk. On the other, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, poised, composed, and calm. Her posture spoke volumes, she was ready for whatever came next. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Trump's energy filled the room like wildfire, unpredictable, loud, demanding attention. Jasmine radiated quiet steadiness. She wasn't here to compete with his volume, she was here to be heard. The moderator, a well-known CBS journalist, tried to ease into the discussion, asking about bipartisan initiatives and economic recovery. Trump responded with his trademark flair, a mix of bravado, humor, and sharp edges. The audience chuckled at some of his quips, but the laughter was thin, hesitant. They weren't there for small talk, they were waiting for the confrontation. Jasmine sat patiently, jotting notes in a small leather notebook. She had done her homework. Her team had warned her, stay composed, they said. He thrives on reactions. But Jasmine was no stranger to pressure. She had been a public defender before Congress. Angry judges, difficult clients, even threats. This was just another courtroom, only this one had a jury of the entire country. When the moderator finally turned to her, Jasmine leaned forward slightly, calm and focused. Congresswoman Crockett, he began, you've been vocal about government transparency and accountability. If you had the chance to address the president directly about these issues, what would you say? Millions of eyes were on her. Jasmine glanced briefly at Trump, then back to the audience. Mr. President, she said, voice steady and professional, the American people deserve clarity. Over the past few months, we've seen policies implemented without explanation, contracts handed to private interests, and questions left unanswered. My question is simple, who are these policies really serving, the people or your allies? A few gasps rippled through the audience. It wasn't an attack, but it was bold, direct, impossible to ignore. Trump's expression tightened. He adjusted his microphone and leaned forward. Jasmine, he said, drawing out her name, you're talking about things you don't understand. You've been in Congress for what, 2 years? I've been running this country. Maybe you should take notes instead of making accusations. The crowd reacted instantly, a mix of laughter, murmurs, and scattered applause. Some cheered, some frowned, unsure whether to support or cringe. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed steady. The moderator tried to redirect, but Trump continued. See, this is what happens. You have these people always complaining, never accomplishing. They want to look tough on TV, but they don't know how to get things done. Phones lifted into the air, recording every word. Clips were already hitting social media. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. This wasn't policy anymore. This was personal. Jasmine took a slow breath, glanced at the moderator, who gave a subtle nod. The message was clear, your turn. Before she could respond, a woman in the second row whispered, barely audible, he shouldn't have said that. But her sentiment echoed what millions were thinking. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was about respect. Jasmine spoke. Mr. President, she said softly, I may be new compared to you, but integrity doesn't have a learning curve. The audience stirred. Trump raised his eyebrows but stayed silent. She continued, public service is about accountability, not arrogance. You don't measure leadership by how loudly you talk but by how honestly you answer. The last sentence landed like a pin drop in a quiet church. Even the moderator looked stunned. Trump chuckled, brushing it off. "That's cute," he said, smirking. "You rehearsed that." "No," she replied. "I lived it." For a second, you could see it in Trump's expression, surprise, maybe discomfort. Cameras caught it. The audience felt it. Across the country, millions leaned in, sensing a shift. But the storm hadn't started yet. The crowd buzzed from Jasmine's words. Even those expecting another predictable town hall felt something different, a spark, a weight. The moderator shuffled papers nervously, trying to reset the tone, but the energy had shifted. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, smirk intact. He was ready to move on. Jasmine wasn't. She straightened her notes, looked at the moderator, and said calmly, "I'd like to ask one more question, if I may." The moderator hesitated, aware of the risk. The audience murmured in agreement. In the control room, producers sensed ratings gold. Through his earpiece, he gave the go-ahead. "Go ahead, Congresswoman." Jasmine nodded once, then turned to face Trump. Her voice stayed calm, but the conviction behind it was unmistakable. "Mr. President, the American people have seen billions allocated in emergency funding over the last quarter, yet many communities are still waiting for basic support. Hospitals underfunded, schools under-resourced, small businesses closing daily. You've spoken about putting America first, but it feels like America's working class is last in line. So I'll ask directly, where is that money going?" The words landed hard. This wasn't a political jab, it was a question the country had been asking at kitchen tables, gas stations, classrooms, and church halls. It hit nerves because it was real. Trump's expression hardened. His jaw tightened, and he adjusted the microphone. "You know, Jasmine," he began, "I've heard this before. Every time we try to make progress, there's someone like you stirring the pot. We've done more for the economy than any administration in history, especially for people like you." The phrase lingered in the air, people like you. The audience reacted instantly. Some gasped, others tried to laugh it off, but the unease in the room was palpable. Even the moderator blinked in disbelief, unsure whether to intervene. Trump pressed on, seemingly unaware of how his words landed. "I've given opportunities, jobs, business growth, record employment. And what do I get in return? Complaints. Maybe if Congress spent less time criticizing and more time learning from success, we'd get somewhere." Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't even blink. Her calm, unreadable expression carried a quiet power, enough to make others uneasy, not through anger, but sheer control. An older teacher near the front folded her arms, no longer cheering. Behind her, a young man shook his head, whispering to his friend, "He shouldn't have said that." The moderator cleared his throat. "Let's keep the discussion focused on policy," he said, voice slightly shaky. But the cameras had already zoomed in on Jasmine's face. She spoke quietly, deliberately, respectfully. "Mr. President, this isn't about people like me. It's about Americans who feel forgotten, the single mother in Oklahoma working 2 jobs who still can't afford insulin for her child, the veteran in Nevada waiting 8 months for a disability check. It's about transparency, because if we can't track where the money goes, how can we trust where it comes from?" The auditorium went silent. Even Trump seemed unsure how to respond. He opened his mouth, but then the crowd broke into soft applause. A few claps at first, scattered, hesitant, but they spread quickly. It wasn't partisan, it was human. Jasmine didn't smile. She let the sound rise, not as a victory, but as proof that truth still had weight. Trump leaned back, tone sharp. "You sound like you're giving a campaign speech. You think you're going to win votes off me? Good luck." She met his eyes. "I'm not campaigning, sir. I'm asking for honesty." The moderator turned to Trump. "Mr. President, would you like to respond?" He exhaled sharply. Look, we've done incredible things, incredible. But the problem is people like Congresswoman Crockett here. They don't appreciate success. They want to talk about numbers they don't even understand. She's a talker, not a doer. Gasps echoed. The line, which might have sounded confident years ago, now felt bitter, defensive. The audience sensed the imbalance, one person attacking, the other holding steady. From the control room, a producer whispered, "This is blowing up. Check Twitter." Within seconds, hashtags were trending, hashtag Crockett phase Trump, hashtag town hall moment, hashtag respect matters. Jasmine wasn't seeking clout. She was seeking accountability. She glanced at her notes, then the moderator, and said, "With all due respect, I do my work quietly. I just believe leadership is louder when it serves others." A pause. No one moved. Even the cameras seemed frozen. Trump leaned back, chuckling, muttering, "You're something else." Not a compliment, but the audience heard it as one. What no one realized then was that this line of questioning, this single moment, would ignite a national firestorm neither side could control. The tension between him and Jasmine crackled like static before a storm. The audience sensed it. Trump leaned closer to the microphone, his tone shifting from dismissive to confrontational. "You know, Jasmine," he said, voice rising slightly, "I've met a lot of people who talk about accountability, who talk about transparency, but when it's time to actually do something, they vanish. You stand here talking about numbers, about honesty, but I don't see results. Just another politician pretending to care." Each word dripped with sarcasm, designed to sting. Some in the audience clapped automatically, others stayed silent, riveted by the exchange. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her hands rested on the table, steady, almost disarming, as if his attacks couldn't land where he wanted. Trump noticed. His tone hardened further. "You come here, talking about forgotten people, about struggles, but you're sitting in Washington. You've got your office, your staff, your perks. Don't tell me you understand the average American better than I do. I built businesses, I created jobs. You've created speeches." Cheers erupted from one corner of the room, mostly supporters in red hats waving small flags, but the applause was uneven, scattered, hesitant. The moderator looked uncomfortable, glancing between Jasmine and Trump, trying to gauge whether to intervene. Trump pressed on. "You say you're fighting for the people. But let's be honest, Congresswoman," Trump said, leaning forward slightly, "you're fighting for attention. Trying to make a moment. Go viral, get your headlines, maybe a book deal later, who knows? That's what this is about." The crowd gasped. Even for Trump, it was unusually pointed. Jasmine remained calm, her face unchanged, letting the silence swallow the words, making them seem smaller, like echoes fading off stone. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. President, attention fades. Accountability doesn't." Trump scoffed. "Cute line. You think that's going to save you when the cameras stop rolling?" Jasmine leaned forward slightly. "I don't need saving," she replied. "I need answers." The audience stirred. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras flashed, capturing the moment. "You people always want answers," Trump said, voice tight with irritation and disbelief. "We're running a country here, not a classroom. Maybe if you spent less time criticizing and more time learning how things actually get done, we'd make some progress." The phrase "you people" hit like a brick. The air shifted. Whispers began immediately. "Did he really just say that?" one woman murmured. Another muttered defensively, though her voice carried little conviction. The moderator adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. President," he began, "perhaps we can steer this back." "No, I'm not finished," Trump cut him off. "I'm tired of being told by people like her how to do my job. I've done more for this country than anyone in that Congress building ever will." By now, the audience wasn't clapping, just watching. Concerned, fascinated, tense. Everyone sensed the shift, from debate to confrontation. Jasmine leaned into her microphone, calm but piercing. Sir, this isn't about who's done more. It's about who's doing right. Trump blinked, caught off guard. Doing right, he repeated, chuckling under his breath. You sound like a preacher. Maybe you should run a church instead of running your mouth. The words were harsher than expected from a sitting president on a national broadcast. A few gasps cut through the silence, followed by uneasy shuffling. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her hands remained folded. She let the room's energy rise and fall before replying. Mr. President, she said quietly, when leaders mock decency, they weaken the very seat they occupy. This isn't about ego. It's about trust. You can't talk about serving the people while belittling those who question you. That's not leadership. That's performance. The audience murmured, astonished. Trump's smile faltered. The moderator jumped in, voice trembling slightly. All right, let's keep the tone respectful, this is an important discussion. But the damage was done. Trump picked up his water glass, sipped slowly, muttering into the mic, unbelievable. At home, millions were glued to their screens. Commentators on Twitter dissected every word. One conservative pundit defended Trump's bluntness. A liberal analyst said Jasmine had just given a master class in composure. Inside the auditorium, though, the focus was on the next move. Trump shifted, unused to someone holding their ground so steadily. Most people either flinch, lash back, or look away, but Jasmine did none of that. She stayed deliberate, grounded, unbothered. The moderator tried again to reset the discussion, but the silence was louder than words. And this wasn't weakness. It was the kind of quiet that comes right before a moment no one forgets. For a full 10 seconds, the auditorium held its breath. The tension was thick, charged, the kind of silence that signals a line has been crossed. Eyes darted between Trump and Jasmine, waiting. Trump leaned back, sipping water, confident, pleased with himself. Jasmine didn't move. Her posture was steady, her face composed. This stillness wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. The camera stayed fixed on her, sensing something was coming. Even the moderator had gone quiet, wary of interrupting whatever energy had taken hold. Trump set down his glass with a faint clink. Are we done with the grandstanding, he said, breaking the silence, or do you want to keep pretending you're not reading from a script? A few awkward chuckles rose from the back rows, but faded quickly. Jasmine looked up slowly. I wasn't aware truth needed a script, she said softly. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried, clear and unwavering, through the entire room. Trump smirked. Oh, it's truth now, huh? Very dramatic. You should be on television. Well, I guess you are now. A few laughs, some scattered claps, but most of the room stayed quiet. The balance of power on stage was shifting, and the audience could feel it. Jasmine took a slow breath, eyes fixed on him. Mr. President, I didn't come here for television, she said steadily. I came for answers the public deserves. Trump rolled his eyes. Here we go again. The public, the people, the forgotten, same speech every time. She tilted her head slightly. Maybe it's because too many of them are still waiting for change. The moderator tried to interject, but Jasmine raised a hand, not in defiance, but to signal she wasn't done. The audience leaned forward. Let me remind you, she continued, calm yet sharpened with intent, these people aren't numbers on a chart. They're parents, workers, veterans, students, they're the foundation of this country. And when they ask where their money, their trust, and their hope have gone, they deserve more than jokes in return. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was respect. Trump chuckled softly, shaking his head. You politicians love talking about people like that. Acting like you're their savior. I'm not their savior, Jasmine said, cutting in before he could respond. I'm their representative. That's my job. And if doing that job makes people in power uncomfortable, then so be it. The audience erupted. Applause, loud and sustained, people standing, some cheering, others clapping quietly with pride. Trump's smile faltered. He looked around, trying to gauge whether the reaction was real. It was. The moderator raised his voice, attempting to restore order. Let's settle down, please. We still have time for audience questions. But the tone of the night had already changed. What began as a routine political exchange had become a test of grace under pressure. Jasmine leaned back slightly, letting the applause fade before speaking again. This isn't about disagreement, she said, turning to the moderator. It's about respect. We can debate policies all day, that's healthy. But when debate turns into disrespect, we lose more than civility. We lose credibility. Trump leaned into his microphone. You're saying I'm not respectful? I've been one of the most respectful presidents this country's ever had. Ask anyone. A few nervous laughs broke out. Jasmine gave a patient, small smile. Respect isn't something you declare, sir. It's something you show. The audience murmured. Even the cameraman seemed locked on her, lenses fixed. Trump shifted, visibly frustrated. You're trying to make this about feelings. People don't want feelings, they want results. Results don't mean much, Jasmine replied evenly, if people can't trust the hands delivering them. The crowd went wild. The moderator's voice was drowned out by applause, flashes of cameras everywhere. Staff on both sides exchanged glances, some smiling, some frowning, whispering that this moment would dominate the news cycle for days. Trump muttered something to an aide, posture less confident, defensive. He tried to speak, but the applause only grew louder. Then Jasmine said something that made every head in the room turn. Mr. President, she said, people don't remember who shouted the loudest, they remember who stood their ground the longest. Trump's smirk vanished completely. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You done? He asked, almost under his breath. She met his gaze. Not until the truth is heard. It was one of those exchanges where the cameras captured something bigger than words, a shift in energy, posture, and public perception. Viewers at home didn't need commentary, they understood. It was a test of control, character, and the limits of power under pressure. The crowd stayed on its feet. The moderator motioned for quiet, but it took nearly half a minute for the applause to fade. Even then, the energy didn't disappear, it hovered, vibrating in the air. Cameras stayed locked on Jasmine. Her name was already trending online, but she didn't care. She was thinking about the people watching from their living rooms, the ones who had no voice on that stage. Trump shifted, visibly irritated. Now you've had your fun, he said sharply. Made your little speech. Everyone's clapping. Congratulations. Maybe next time you can run the show. Jasmine turned to him slowly, calm but unyielding. This isn't about a show. It's about accountability. The people who trusted you deserve better than insults when they ask for answers. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the table. Oh please. You want to talk about insults? I've been insulted every day for 8 years, fake news, witch hunts, endless investigations. You think you can lecture me about respect? Jasmine didn't look away. Respect doesn't mean silence, she said evenly. It means standing up when something's wrong. And I think the American people are tired of being told they should just be grateful when gratitude doesn't fill their refrigerators. The line hit hard. Murmurs spread across the room, approval, surprise, admiration. Even some who had clapped for Trump earlier were now watching Jasmine differently. Trump scoffed. Oh, you're real tough, huh? Think you're some kind of hero talking down to me on live TV? Go ahead, tell everyone how perfect you are. Jasmine shook her head. I'm far from perfect, but I know what it's like to grow up in a house where bills come before comfort. I know what it's like to fight for the people who don't have a platform. And if that makes me tough, then I'll take it. The crowd clapped again, not as loud, but with sincerity. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was resonance. Trump laughed, but it lacked humor. You know, Jasmine, you sound like a motivational speaker. Maybe that's where your career should have gone. Politics clearly isn't your strong suit. She smiled slightly, not as someone insulted, but as someone who had already decided not to be dragged into a shouting match. "Maybe," she said, "but at least I speak to lift people up, not tear them down." The audience erupted again, louder this time. The moderator tried to interject, but his voice was drowned out. Trump straightened his tie, visibly annoyed. "You're very proud of yourself, aren't you?" "Pride isn't the point, sir," Jasmine replied evenly. "Integrity is. Leadership starts with empathy. It shouldn't be controversial to say that." A woman in the front row stood and clapped, soon another joined her. Within seconds, half the room was on its feet. It wasn't partisan, it was human. Trump looked around, visibly frustrated. "All right," he said into the mic, "you all want to cheer, go ahead. But when you're paying higher taxes and losing your jobs, don't come crying to me." Jasmine took a breath, eyes steady. "That's the thing, Mr. President. The people aren't crying to you, they're crying for you. They still believe you could do the right thing if you listened instead of fought." The room froze. Even the moderator stopped shuffling papers. That line hit harder than anyone expected. Trump blinked, expression momentarily blank, words failing to come. Cameras captured every second, the pause, the flicker of surprise, the tightening of his grip on the table edge. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, voice low but unwavering. "You have power most people will never touch, and they trusted you with it. But power without humility, that's not strength. That's fear." A stunned hush filled the auditorium. Then the crowd rose again, applause thunderous, sustained, emotional. Even the press stopped typing, caught in the moment. Trump leaned back, face unreadable, eyes flicking toward the cameras. For once, he didn't interrupt. Though everyone could tell he hated it, Jasmine didn't gloat or smile. She glanced down briefly at her notes, then back to the audience. "We can disagree on policy," she said, "but we shouldn't disagree on dignity." The moderator's voice returned, shaky but measured. "All right, let's take a moment before moving to audience questions." But no one cared about audience questions anymore. The moment they came for had already happened. They had seen something raw, something real, a clash of ego and principle, and a woman who refused to be diminished. Across the country, millions were replaying the clip, quoting her, sharing captions like "This is what leadership looks like." The story didn't end on that stage, it was only beginning. What happened after that night would take the confrontation from a viral moment to political legend. When the broadcast resumed after a brief commercial break, the auditorium felt different. The tension hadn't disappeared, it had evolved. The crowd was alert, emotionally invested, waiting for what would come next. Cameras panned across faces, some smiling, some thoughtful, a few still uncomfortable, but everyone knew something important had just happened. Jasmine Crocker sat back in her chair, hands lightly clasped on the desk, composure in sharp contrast to Trump, who was visibly trying to regain control. His expression was stern, jaw set. Aides offstage exchanged uneasy glances, knowing the clip of Jasmine dismantling his remarks was already everywhere. The moderator cleared his throat. "We're back. Before we move to audience questions, I want to acknowledge what just happened. This is what democracy looks like: tough questions, strong opinions, and passion on both sides." Trump forced a tight smile. "Passion, sure," he said, "but I call it grandstanding." A few chuckles came from one corner, but they didn't spread. The mood had shifted too much for dismissal. Jasmine turned toward him. "Standing for the truth isn't grandstanding," she said simply. "It's leadership." The moderator tried again. "Let's hear from the audience," he said, pointing to a young woman in the third row holding a microphone. She looked nervous but determined. "Mr. President," the woman began, her voice steady, "my husband's a truck driver. We've been struggling with rising fuel costs and healthcare bills. I voted for you twice, but I'd like to know why we haven't seen the relief you promised." The room seemed to tighten. Trump straightened in his chair, ready to respond. "Look, sweetheart," he said, "we've done more for truckers and working families than anyone. Gas prices are down compared to before, and healthcare, we're fixing it. You just have to give it time. The woman frowned. It's been years, sir. Trump hesitated, his tone defensive. Well, it takes time. The economy was wrecked by the people before me. We've done an amazing job rebuilding it. Jasmine didn't interrupt, but her expression said enough. She waited until the moderator turned toward her. Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond? Yes, she said softly. Ma'am, thank you for your question. You shouldn't have to wait years for relief. You shouldn't have to choose between paying for gas and paying for medicine. That's not patience, that's pain. And our government should never ask families to bear that kind of burden in silence. The room fell quiet again. Then applause began, slow at first, then building in waves. The woman in the audience nodded, visibly emotional. Trump leaned back, clearly irritated, fingers tapping against the table. Another audience member, an older man wearing a "Veterans for Trump" pin, stood. I'm a lifelong conservative, he said. I've supported you, Mr. President, but tonight I think the Congresswoman makes a fair point. We all want strength, but we also want empathy. That's not weakness, that's decency. The room erupted in applause again, louder this time. Even the moderator looked surprised. Trump pressed his lips together, trying to laugh it off. Well, I appreciate that, he said, tone edged with sarcasm. We've got a lot of feelings in here tonight. Jasmine met his gaze calmly. Maybe feelings are what we've been missing, she said. Numbers don't cry when they lose their homes, people do. The audience clapped again, some standing now. Cameras zoomed in on faces, people nodding, whispering to each other. The shift was undeniable. Trump had started the evening with full control, but Jasmine now held the moral center of the room. In the control booth, producers whispered rapid updates. It's blowing up online, one said. Clips are everywhere, TikTok, YouTube, X. She's trending in all regions. By the time the next audience question came, the momentum had completely turned. A young veteran asked Trump about support for mental health programs. His response was perfunctory, filled with familiar phrases about doing more than anyone before me. When Jasmine spoke, she didn't cite statistics. She told a story. I met a veteran in El Paso, she said. He told me the hardest part wasn't the battlefield, it was coming home and feeling forgotten. He didn't need speeches or parades. He needed someone to answer the phone when he called for help. Tears glistened in the eyes of some listeners. Trump opened his mouth, then stopped. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound hollow. The moderator finally ended the segment. We're out of time, he said. I want to thank both of you for being here tonight. The audience rose to a standing ovation, rare for these events. But the remarkable part wasn't who they were applauding, it was what they were applauding. Not a party, not a victory, they were applauding decency. Trump gave a brief wave and exited quickly, flanked by aides. Jasmine stayed a moment longer, shaking hands, smiling humbly, thanking the moderator. She didn't bask in it, she absorbed it quietly, with the calm of someone who knew the night wasn't about her. It was about the truth landing where it needed to. As the cameras faded to black, the real battle had only begun. Once the footage hit the internet, the story took on a life of its own, far beyond the auditorium walls. By sunrise, clips from the Arlington town hall flooded every corner of the internet. On Twitter, Jasmine Crockett's name shot to #1, just above Trump meltdown. Cable networks replayed the same 30-second exchange on a loop, Jasmine's calm stare, Trump's flustered tone, and that one line, "Power without humility is fear," wearing a suit. By 8 a.m., major outlets like CNN, NBC, and even Fox News had cut into scheduled programming to analyze the confrontation. Pundits dissected every second, every pause, every expression. Conservative commentators called it disrespectful, accusing Jasmine of grandstanding. Others, even some from Trump's usual base, admitted she'd shown composure many found refreshing. Outside Washington, everyday people were talking, in diners in Kansas, barbershops in Ohio, radio talk shows in Florida. Everyone had an opinion. Some praised Jasmine for standing up. Without losing her temper, Jasmine held the room. Some said she had crossed the line, others called it bold, but no one could deny she had seized the moment, and perhaps something more dangerous, the narrative itself. In a small Dallas apartment, a young teacher named Erica scrolled through clips of the town hall over morning coffee. She whispered to herself, someone who doesn't back down. In Detroit, a retired veteran named Carl watched the replay on his old flat-screen TV. Out loud, he muttered, she handled him better than most of his rivals ever did. The ripple was real. Late-night comedians jumped in, running segments titled The Crockett Shock and When Calm Beats Chaos. Inside the White House, however, amusement was scarce. Trump's communications team had stayed up all night drafting statements. By morning, an official release accused Crockett of staging a political ambush and disrespecting the presidency. But it landed poorly. Defensiveness oozed from every word. When reporters asked if he regretted his remarks, Trump smirked. Regret? Numbers. I don't regret telling the truth. She was grandstanding and the media ate it up. But his tone betrayed irritation. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crocker walked the Capitol halls that morning, flashes from photographers following her every step. Congresswoman. Congresswoman. Any comment on the president's response? Reporters shouted. She stopped briefly, smiled faintly, and said, I think the exchange spoke for itself. I just hope the conversation now focuses on the real issues, not the noise. Her team urged caution. Lay low for a few days, her chief of staff advised. But Jasmine knew power wasn't in silence, it was in purpose. That afternoon, she sat down for an MSNBC interview. The host asked, Congresswoman, what were you thinking in that moment when the president made that comment? Jasmine paused. I was thinking about how many people face that same tone every day, people who speak up and get talked down to just for asking fair questions. I wasn't angry, I just didn't want to be another person who let it slide. The clip went viral instantly. Viewers called it poise under pressure. One user wrote, she didn't raise her voice once and somehow said everything. The backlash was fierce, too. Conservative talk radio accused her of playing the victim, others labeled her the left's new poster child. That night, Trump posted on social media, Jasmine Crockett equals fake class. She read off a teleprompter. No substance. Just attitude. Sad, millions interacted with the post, angry or amused. But instead of fading, the attention grew. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett Clapback, hashtag Respect in Politics, and hashtag Fear Wearing a Suit flooded feeds. A clip of a little girl in Baltimore watching Jasmine with her mother went viral. She talks like us, the girl said. In Dallas, CNN set up outside the University Center, interviewing attendees. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap said, I came here a Trump supporter, I'm still one. But that lady didn't lose her cool. That meant something. I respect that. By the third day, what started as a heated exchange had become something bigger. Universities began showing the footage in political science classes. Social commentators called it a watershed moment for tone in politics. International outlets from the BBC to Al Jazeera covered the Crockett effect. Through it all, Jasmine stayed quiet on social media. No hashtags, no retweets, no posts. When a journalist asked why, she smiled. Because the moment doesn't need me to repeat it. It needs people to remember it. Behind the scenes, her team received calls from advocacy groups, women's organizations, and educators nationwide. Invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and youth summits poured in. One email read simply, you didn't just answer back. You answered for all of us. As her reputation soared, so did the pressure. Political operatives whispered she might be the future face of her party, others warned she needed to watch her back. But while pundits debated and media speculated, Jasmine focused on what came next. The storm she had stirred was far from over, it was just beginning to show its real power. 3 days after the town hall, Washington felt different. Reporters huddled closer on Capitol Hill. Late-night monologues referenced her. Even cab drivers and baristas dissected the exchange. Jasmine Crockett's name was no longer just part of the news cycle, it had become the news itself. Her office phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Invitations from universities, community groups, and civic organizations flooded in. Emails arrived from high school debate teams asking her to speak, and from a women's shelter in Baltimore, thanking her for standing tall. While others tried to talk her down, Jasmine let none of it reach her. That morning, she sat at her desk, reviewing notes for an upcoming committee hearing, when her communications director, Malika, stepped in carrying a stack of printed headlines. "You're everywhere," Malika said, dropping them gently onto the desk. "Every paper, every site. The New York Times ran a front-page headline calling you the voice that wouldn't shake. And Fox had a full panel last night debating whether you embarrassed the president, or just made good television." Jasmine gave a faint smile, leaning back in her chair. "Well," she said, "if they can't decide which it was, maybe it means we hit the right nerve." Malika nodded, but her expression tightened. "You've also got some not-so-kind messages. They're calling you divisive, disrespectful, all the usual labels. Do you want us to respond?" "No," Jasmine replied. "Let them talk. I said what needed to be said." Her phone buzzed again, another call request, this time from a national morning show. She ignored it. What she needed now wasn't another interview. It was focus. That afternoon, she gathered her staff in the conference room. The blinds were half closed, sunlight spilling across the polished table. "We're not turning this into a PR tour," Jasmine began. "I don't want a moment to become a brand. I want it to mean something." One of her senior advisors, Peter, looked up from his laptop. "You've started something, Congresswoman. People are listening. You could use this momentum, introduce new ethics legislation, call for a transparency bill, strike while it's fresh." Jasmine nodded slowly. "Yes, but it has to come from integrity, not attention. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." Later that evening, as the Capitol lights glowed against the darkening sky, Jasmine drove home in silence. Her phone buzzed constantly with alerts, tweets, op-eds, invitations, but she didn't check a single one. The night air, heavy with spring humidity, offered the quiet she needed. When she finally reached her apartment, she sank onto the couch and turned on the TV. The first thing she saw was a rerun of the town hall, the clip of Trump's tightening face, her steady gaze, the crowd's reaction, playing on repeat, but this time, she wasn't watching as a participant. She was watching as a witness. Analysts discussed the moment. A political historian said, "It's not that she shouted him down, it's that she didn't." That restraint changed the perception. "She didn't fight fire with fire," another commentator added. "She made fire look foolish." It's rare to see grace win in real time. Jasmine muted the television. She wasn't looking for praise. Underneath all the noise, she heard the message itself. People were desperate for something real. Meanwhile, at the White House, aides scrambled to redirect the narrative. Trump's inner circle wanted to shift focus to upcoming economic announcements, but every attempt failed. Reporters kept returning to Jasmine Crocker. "Do you plan to apologize for your tone?" one journalist asked during a press gaggle. Trump waved it off. "No one's owed an apology. I'm the most respectful person you'll ever meet." She was just being dramatic. But the damage was done. Even within his base, cracks had begun to show. One conservative columnist wrote, "You can disagree with her politics, but you can't deny she handled herself with dignity, and that's something every leader should learn from." Back in Texas, the auditorium where it all happened had become a minor landmark. Students filmed TikToks, imitating Jasmine's famous line. Local news interviewed janitors, camera operators, even the sound technician who'd worked the event. Everyone had a story about the night things changed. Jasmine's team cautioned her. "Political attention can turn as fast as it rises," Malika warned. "The same media that lifts you up will look for any reason to tear you down." "I know," Jasmine said. "That's why we keep our eyes on the people, not the cameras." A few nights later, she accepted an invitation to appear on a late-night news panel, not to relive the confrontation, but to talk about ethics and trust in government. The host asked, "After everything that's happened, what's your biggest takeaway?" Jasmine smiled thoughtfully. "Power doesn't define character. Character defines power. And sometimes, you have to lose your cool in someone else's story to keep your truth in your own." The room went quiet. The host softly said, "That's going to stick with people." She nodded. "I hope it does." That night, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mother. "Your grandmother would have been proud." Jasmine set the phone down and finally let herself breathe. The storm had brought noise, criticism, chaos, but beneath it all, there was clarity, and yet, the story wasn't over. What came next would redefine her career, her reputation, and perhaps even the political landscape itself. By the end of the week, the exchange between Jasmine Crocker and President Trump had become far more than a viral moment, it had become a turning point. The moment had evolved into a national conversation. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was about tone, respect, and how leaders carried themselves when challenged. Cable news panels replayed the town hall clip daily, but now the focus had shifted. Instead of debating who won, pundits analyzed what it all meant, professors dissected it in communication classes. Church leaders quoted her in sermons. Editorial boards across the country used it as a lens to question what leadership had become. On the steps of a courthouse in Columbus, a protester held a sign reading, "Power without humility is fear," wearing a suit. The phrase had taken on a life of its own, printed on t-shirts, stickers, even murals. One viral photograph showed a group of high school girls in front of their library, holding a hand-painted banner with the same line, smiling proudly beneath it. Back in Washington, Jasmine Crocker tried to maintain her routine. She arrived early, stayed late, and declined most interviews. Her staff noticed the influx of calls, from veterans, nurses, single parents, people who had rarely reached out before. "You made us feel seen," they said. But for every message of support, there was resistance. Trump's allies mobilized, calling her the media's new darling, accusing her of weaponizing identity. Conservative talk shows dissected her motives, while trolls flooded her inbox. Jasmine didn't react. She knew better than to meet outrage with outrage. "Let them scream," she told her team. "I'll keep working." That same day, she received an invitation to speak before the House Committee on Government Oversight. The timing was perfect, the hearing focused on ethics in executive decision-making. Her staff advised professionalism, cautioning her to avoid referencing the town hall. But Jasmine understood that sometimes the line between personal and political could not be ignored. The committee room was packed. Reporters filled every seat, cameras trained on her. She adjusted the microphone and began, her voice steady. "Transparency isn't a partisan issue, it's a moral one. If we want the public to trust us, we have to earn it, not demand it." Her words were deliberate, her tone warm, not combative. She spoke about the danger of arrogance in leadership, the need for humility from those who wield power. She never mentioned the president by name, yet everyone knew who she meant. One congressman muttered, "She's grandstanding again." But a colleague beside him whispered back, "She's not wrong." The speech made the evening news in full. Pundits described it as measured, mature, unexpectedly bipartisan. Even a conservative editorial board wrote, "Her poise is what Washington desperately needs right now." Trump, visibly frustrated by the media's focus on her, doubled down at a White House press conference. "I don't even know who that woman is," he said. "She got lucky off a soundbite. Let's see her actually get something done." The next morning, Jasmine's office released a single-line statement, "Challenge accepted." Within 2 weeks, she introduced a bipartisan ethics bill requiring full disclosure of executive contracts and government spending. It wasn't flashy, but it was bold, and it gained traction immediately. Several moderate Republicans signed on as co-sponsors. Reporters dubbed it Crockett's Credibility Act. The story shifted again. Headlines no longer called her the Congresswoman who clapped back. Now they called her the Congresswoman who followed through. At a town hall in San Antonio, she addressed nearly 1,000 people. "I didn't go viral to become famous," she said, her voice carrying across the gymnasium. "I went viral because I refused to stay silent when respect was on the line. But now that you've heard me, let's get to work." The crowd erupted, some cheering her name, others standing in quiet respect. Among them, an elderly woman held a handwritten sign, "Thank you for not yelling." Later that night, a journalist asked if the moment on TV had changed her career. Jasmine smiled thoughtfully. "No," she said. "It reminded me why I started it." Her approval ratings climbed steadily. Cable networks referred to her as one of the most recognizable faces in modern politics. Invitations poured in, from universities, global forums, but Jasmine kept her focus on legislation. When asked about the president's ongoing criticism, she laughed softly. "He can say what he wants," she replied. "I'm busy building something that lasts longer than headlines, trust." By midsummer, her bill had passed the House with overwhelming support. Even a few of Trump's allies quietly voted yes, knowing how it would look if they didn't. Jasmine didn't celebrate publicly. That night, her staff found her in her office, sitting alone, staring out at the Capitol dome. "You did it," Malika said quietly. "No," Jasmine replied. "We did. The people did." Outside, the city glowed. The same city that once doubted her now echoed with her words. Power hadn't changed her, she had changed its rhythm, but the story didn't end with legislation. True leadership, she knew, is tested not when people cheer for you, but when they challenge what you stand for. Next autumn, Washington felt different. Leaves along Constitution Avenue had begun to turn gold, the air soft and crisp. Reporters had moved on to new scandals, the endless political spin cycle chasing the next story. But for Jasmine Crocker, life hadn't returned to normal, not entirely. Her office was busier than ever. Constituents stopped by not just to shake her hand, but to share their stories. A nurse from Tucson said the town hall gave her courage to demand fair pay. A teenager from Des Moines played the clip for her civics class, demonstrating that calm can win. A small-town mayor from Idaho wrote, "Your composure reminded me why I ran for office." For Jasmine, these moments mattered more than any headline. They were proof that dignity could still cut through noise. That she'd been invited on talk shows, to write a memoir, even to star in a documentary, but she declined most opportunities. "I don't want to be remembered for a viral clip," she told Malika. "I want to be remembered for what we built after it." In the following weeks, she traveled across the country, not for campaign stops, but for conversations. Farmers in Kansas worried about rising costs. Veterans in Nevada struggled to access healthcare. Teachers in Indiana tried to do more with less. Everywhere she went, people mentioned the town hall alongside their frustrations. One night in Phoenix, sitting on a folding chair in a community center, a man in his 60s raised his hand. "Congresswoman," he said, "that night you kept your cool when he tried to tear you down. How did you do it?" "I would have lost it." Jasmine smiled, folding her hands in her lap. "Losing it wouldn't have helped the people I was there to represent," she said softly. "Anger burns fast, but composure builds something. It shows people that even under fire, you still believe the truth is worth standing in." A brief silence followed, then the room responded, not with cheers, but with steady, thoughtful applause. The kind that comes from understanding rather than excitement. When she returned to Washington that weekend, Malika greeted her with another thick stack of letters. One envelope stood out, cream-colored, written in neat cursive. Inside was a short note from a retired schoolteacher in Vermont: "Thank you for reminding us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to bow." Jasmine sat quietly after reading it, her eyes fixed on the window where the afternoon light spilled across her desk. Later that evening, she accepted one last interview request, this time from a small local station in her home district. The host was young, earnest, not a celebrity chasing ratings, and Jasmine liked that. Leaning forward, the reporter asked, "Congresswoman, after all these months, what do you think that moment taught people?" Jasmine paused, then answered softly, that decency still matters. We've gotten used to shouting matches, to seeing people win by tearing others apart. But sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay calm, to refuse to meet disrespect with more disrespect. That's how we change the temperature in the room. The host nodded. Do you think it changed you? Jasmine smiled faintly. No, she said. It reminded me of who I already was. That line would later appear as the closing quote in countless articles about her. In that moment, though, she wasn't thinking about headlines. She was thinking about her grandmother, the woman who once told her, "Don't raise your voice. Raise your value." After the cameras stopped rolling, Jasmine stepped outside into the cool evening. The streets were quiet, the city lights reflecting off the Potomac. She paused, breathing in the calm. A car passed slowly, a man leaning out the window to shout, "Keep speaking the truth, Congresswoman." She waved, smiling softly, then continued toward her car. Later, at her kitchen table, she sipped tea and scrolled through messages. One video made her pause, a classroom of 8th graders reciting her famous line in unison, "Power without humility is fear," wearing a suit. The caption read, "We're studying leadership. They chose you." Jasmine covered her mouth with her hand, letting out a quiet laugh. Humbling. Surreal. Even one night's courage could echo so far. The clock neared midnight. She closed her laptop and whispered to herself, "Stay grounded. Stay kind. Stay ready." She knew this wasn't the end of her story. Next time she would be challenged, on policy, principle, or on air, she'd meet it the same way, calm, firm, unafraid. Her rise hadn't come from shouting the loudest or fighting dirty. It came from remembering that respect, when held steady under fire, becomes its own kind of revolution. Before heading to bed, she jotted a single line in her notebook, the same one she had carried that night in Arlington. Sometimes grace speaks louder than power. She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the silence of her apartment fill the room, not with pressure this time, but with peace. That was the message Jasmine left behind. Real strength isn't about who dominates the room, but who refuses to lose their humanity. If this story moved you, remember, grace, honesty, and courage still matter.